Okay, hello. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. My name is Allen Sanchez, and I am the president of Common Spirit St. Joseph's Children, and the official petitioner for the cause of beatification and canonization of the servant of God, Blandina Segale.
And I was interested in this, I think maybe a year or two ago, because for whatever reason, because I read New Mexico literature, whatever's out there, I read her book. Well, she didn't really write it as a book. It's sort of
It's her
someone
diary.
put together her journal.
It's her diary.
Right?
It's a diary. So it's a diary that she wrote for her sister Justina, who's also a nun. Now Justina's older than her, but she entered first the convent, and then Justina followed her. So it was written for her, but it was printed at the urging of the governor of New Mexico. So
At what point in her life?
1930. So in
Was she still alive?
Yeah, she dies in 1941. Now this is incredible. So Sister Blandina, I'm going to introduce you to her. Blandina's born in Chicago, Italy in 1850. Then in 1854, the family migrates to the United States, and they come in through New Orleans and then make their way up to Cincinnati. At 16 years old, she enters the convent. And then at 22 years old, in 1872, she's sent to the West. And the first stop and assignment is Trinidad, Colorado. And from there, she comes to Santa Fe, and then Santa Fe to Albuquerque, then back to Trinidad, and then back to Cincinnati for the second half of her life. She had like two lives. But in New Mexico history, she's all over. Her fingerprints are all over things that people don't realize. And we'll talk about that.
Yeah, so what really struck me about her and why I loved her book so much and loved her, first of all, I thought she was kind of hilarious. She kind of reminded me of, if you've ever read Louisa May Alcott, you're just sort of just laughing out loud and you're wondering, how is this woman in the late 1800s, so wry and funny and insightful. And then, we really don't have a ton of literature or for not literature exactly, but like first person accounts from Hispanos. And so sort of this felt like the next best thing, because so many things that you read from memoirs or whatever from Anglo or outsiders are always sort of derogatory. Either they don't talk about the Hispanos at all, or they're a footnote, the Mexican driver, or it's very derogatory. And the way that she presented it was so with such warmth and humanity, and she had real relationships with the people, and they really come alive. And I just really appreciated that as someone who's always wanting to know more about my ancestors and how they were living back then, and looking for those accounts. And her view and her perspective was funny and warm and compassionate, and so she just really just popped out as such a real person to me.
And when you get to know her through her book, now there's many other people that have written things about her, but in the book that's published as a diary, it's written very different than you would a journal or a history book or documentation. She's just sharing with her sister that she was so close to. Now they were apart for 22 years, and her hope was that someday when they're back together working together, that they could read it together and she could share the stories. She even writes in there sometimes that she'll stop writing because things are so grim, and she doesn't want her sister to worry for her, suffer for her. But so what she's writing in there, sometimes towns might be misspelled or mispronounced or the wrong town, because it's not a history book. It's her telling her sister, I went to this place, this is what happened, this was there. But you open this up. I know a lot of Santa Feans, Gilbert Pino from Santa Fe and his wife, they both see their relatives mentioned all over this book. So we have people from Trinidad and in Santa Fe and Albuquerque, families mentioned in there. And these are people's ancestors. So the way the book gets published is that after working out in the West, from 1872 to 1896, then she's back in Cincinnati, and she's asked to start this settlement house for immigrants. So the second part of her whole life is working with immigrants. She then is asked to return to Albuquerque because they can't get the Albuquerque hospital off the ground, St. Joseph's. And she comes and she dives in and she takes over and gets the architect online, raises the money, gets it built. But when she's in Cincinnati, there is a paper. She starts the Santa Maria Institute. You can Google that in Cincinnati. And this is a ministry of the sisters helping immigrants. And they had a magazine, and they print a couple of her stories from her diary in there. And that made it to New Mexico. So then, this is years later, in 1930, Governor Dillon writes to her and the Secretary of State and the Archbishop, and he says, "We have seen your stories, and the old timers still remember you. It would be of historical interest for you to print your diary." Then from the same year, there's a letter from Archbishop Dager, and he writes and he says, and they use the same term, the old timers, they remember your heroic work. That was key for opening the cause, because to open a cause for canonization, you must prove that they had heroic virtue. And in the letter, and I can show you this when we're done, and in the letter, it's incredible because the Archbishop says, "And the people here remember your stories, and they have said that your stories are true." So these are witnesses saying, yeah, what's in the book are true stories by witnesses who were around when the events were happening. So that's a very important to prove stories in the book. So then in 1932 it gets published and it's out there, and it's incredible because people that were around in those late 1800s, they remember. If they were young people, they remember her and they remember her stories. And this was a very key piece in one story. You'll enjoy this, and you can get her book from the Sisters of Charity of Cincinnati. If you go online, you can find the book there. It doesn't benefit the cause, so we're not trying to raise any money. So in her book, she tells the story in Trinidad of saving a man from a lynch mob. And she's in the classroom, and she has this little girl, Eva James, is in the class, and her brother comes running to get her. And he looks like a ghost, and sister says, "What's going on? You haven't heard? Pa has shot a man, and as soon as the victim dies, they're going to string up Pa. They're going to kill him." So she jumps into action, and I thought she was jumping into action when you read it just to save Pa, but there's more to the story. So she gets in there. She goes to see the shooter. He's an alcoholic. He's mentally ill also. She convinces him, and it was over a boundary dispute. He was drunk. She convinces him to write a confession, then has to convince the sheriff to go with her and take him to the bedside of the dying man, the victim. He's still alive. Miles Brennan, we don't know. We can't find anything on him, but he must have been a saint because she takes Morris James there and convinces him to forgive him. And before dying, he does that. What a restorative justice. And so he forgives him, and then the crowd can't hang the guy, and she makes them wait for the court. We hired investigators during the cause investigation for the inquiry, and we were able to find the court records and the prison records, and the thing took place. But the inquiry board comes back and says, "But how do you know Blandina actually was, responsible for saving his life?" Well, it wasn't until we know the names and all the people that in the archives we find this letter from 1933, a year after the book is published. And the letter is from Eva James, but she's Eva Clary, so we didn't know the names. In the letter, then she says, "You knew me as Eva James." And she thanks sister once again. "I just read your book." She confirms the story. Wow, years later, she's writing from Paris. She married a man in a Frenchman, and she's in Paris. So the whole story comes together. But the book, that's the heart of the process of the canonization. For opening it, first we have to prove her heroic virtue, and this is the acts and the things she did for the people of Colorado and New Mexico, starting the first public schools, and we're able to prove that these took place. For instance, what they didn't call them public schools; they had different names. One of them was called the industrial school, and she kept going and going back to the territorial legislature, just like we did on the early childhood constitutional amendment, back and back. And there's all these letters. Somebody knew she was a saint because there's a room of boxes and boxes, the archive in Cincinnati. Oh, wow. And there's these letters between her and the Mother Superior, because she was superior in Albuquerque. So they're back and forth on daily events and work, buildings, raising money, everything is in there. But she writes to her and says, when she's in Santa Fe, don't go back to that legislature. Those people are never going to change, you know. But she goes one more time and she gets it. And so then we have the bill that was passed that created the first funding for public schools in New Mexico. And on the back of it, the Speaker of the House writes for Blandina. So she's touched all our lives in New Mexico by starting our public schools.
And what year was that?
That would, oh gosh, I'm losing the date in my head. But before we finish talking, I'll remember it. And then she starts, healthcare. Now, Sisters of Charity came in 1865 with Bishop Lemay, Archbishop Lemay, and he brings what he knows, right? He's working in the Ohio Valley, so he brings Sisters of Charity, the Sisters of Loretto. That's how they get here, so in 1865, Sisters arrive. She comes in 1872 to Colorado and then to Santa Fe. They had a small clinic. Now they need a hospital. She builds a hospital. She builds a school, and then they end up using. She didn't know she was building a hospital. She builds a school, and they say, you know what? It's too nice for the school. Let's use it for the hospital. So there's St. Vincent Hospital that begins in Santa Fe. Many people have been there. Many people have been born there. St. Joseph's in Albuquerque. Gosh, how many people? You run into people all over. They were born there. She started that. But even if you look at New Mexico, all our beautiful adobe buildings that have been saved by corrugated iron. So these buildings were all leaking. So she starts one of the first corrugated iron companies in New Mexico and brings in corrugated iron. And they start saving everything by putting corrugated iron on the adobe buildings. Then they're building the cathedral. She brings in the first crusher, a steamroller crusher, to make gravel, because they were using riverbed sand for mortar. And if it's crushed, it's angular and it connects and it binds. This is like a very practical person. And so all these old buildings in Santa Fe that are brick or rock with mortar, that's all of Sister Blandina's mortar. She's kind of like holding us all together. It's kind of symbolic. So she's not just like out to save souls. It's the day-to-day life which saves the soul, right? Taking care of practical issues. In the hospital, she would make huge sacrifices. There's a story in Santa Fe that all these miners, which is our ancestors also in New Mexico, and railroad workers, they didn't have any health care. They didn't have any insurance. They ended up in the hospital. And so then Blandina had a full hospital, overflowing. And she makes a decision that all the paying patients will go to the hotels, and they'll go and take care of them there. And the non-paying will go into their hospital. So then this one rich man tells her, well, that doesn't sound like a good business transaction. She said, no, the Lord will take care of us. Well, this guy was actually a priest, from a very rich family. And he gives her 2,000 ewes. 2,000. This is how all these Rambouillets ends up in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado. She sends the 2,000 sheep up for crop sharing with Tauseños, and then half of the wool and half of the lambs come back, and that supports the hospital for years. Because at that time, 2,000 sheep is like a big deal. So it's very practical. How does she solve the issue and keep going? And it touches the life of New Mexico and New Mexicans. So when she's building things and raising money, she's not just limited to the Catholic community. Most of the money that went into the cathedral in Santa Fe, Abraham Staab helps her gather that money up. Him being one of the persons that was in the stagecoach when they're attacked by Billy the Kid. So
that's right, because wasn't his wife.
She was going to see her mother because her father had died and was on her way back. You can see the story. The story is in her journal, and then the Smithsonian magazine has done a great story about that because Abraham Staab's great-great-great-granddaughter writes the story.
Well, is she the one that wrote, there's a book called American Ghosts?
Yes, that's her.
And I read that a couple of years ago. It was one of my favorite, I think it was my favorite book I read that year. It was so good.
Yeah, so she's involved in it. So, Billy Kid's a side story. He's not the whole story. It's just, he's really a symbol that she was willing to bring healthcare to everybody and to one of his buddies. This buddy, the guy that she takes care of, Snyder, he was a terrible person. This guy was way worse than Billy the Kid. This guy would get confidence of people and tell him that he was a trail master, and that he could take you from Trinidad to Santa Fe, that he knew the trail. Well, he would pretend right before it gets dark to get kind of lost and then into a deep, dark canyon. And then once those people go to sleep, he would slit their throat. And this is what he confesses to Blandina. So she's kind of freaked out. So this guy, the doctors in Trinidad, apparently, this is the way the story goes, didn't want to give him service, help him. I think more is he's hiding out from the law, you know. So Blandina is taking care of him. Her and one of the vigilant committee members goes with her, and they're taking care of him, taking him clean linen, food, bandages, and he confesses all these terrible things to her. So it turns out he got shot by Happy Jack in the leg, in the femur, and the bone goes up into the femur. They can't get it out. So he's basically dying of an infection. So, you know, there was always a doubt, did this guy ever exist? Well, our researcher finds the obituary of Snyder. Now, Snyder is the name of the neighbors of Billy the Kid, the same family in Silver City. Are they the same? Maybe, maybe not. And he's a friend of Billy the Kid, supposedly, you know. So they find the obituary that Snyder, and everybody knew he was a terrible guy, you know. And the obituary says he was killed by Happy Jack, who our readers are familiar with. So Happy Jack was a real person then. This is a real guy. These are real people that existed. So one day when she's taking care of Schneider, Billy shows up. Now, this is interesting that Billy shows up because he's supposed to be in Arizona. But these guys, they were like, you know, you talk about professionals on horses. There were one with that horse or two horses. They could move from one place to another. We don't know everything about Billy the Kid. We don't know exactly every place he's been.
Weren't there also several Billy the Kids? Like
there were several
guys?
But this one we were able to prove was Billy the Kid, William Bonney. So what it means, read the book. It's interesting because it says she meets Billy, and Snyder tells Billy, "Oh no, she's game." We don't know what that means, but they're onto something. But Billy immediately has some kind of attraction to her, not a physical attraction. He's curious, and there's something in his mind about her. Because when they shake hands, she somewhere else writes, not in the book, about that he held onto her sleeve of the habit and rubbed it. I don't know what that means, but you know, something was coming back to him. So then he says, "Well, whatever you want, sister, I'm there for you. Ever need anything?" You know, he's this punk kid, he's a criminal, but he was very loyal to friends. That's how he got into the whole business of killing people. So then there's the encounter on the stagecoach, which we couldn't find anything. You know, and then I'm on NPR radio talking about Blandina, and so here's Stubbs, the great-great-granddaughter Abraham Stubbs, and we can confirm that story took place. The Archbishop asked her to go with him up to Trinidad to take his wife. She wouldn't be writing something, or she wouldn't publish something she wrote if living people could contradict what she wrote. That was an important piece. And then another encounter with Billy Kid is he's in jail in Santa Fe. The dates don't match up. But remember, she's writing for Justina. Justina doesn't care what the day is. She's telling her what the experience is. The sisters. And there's probably code language in there that we don't really get either, because it's a diary. But she says, this terrible guy, not all these guys, good and bad, right, in Santa Fe, with the new colonization of New Mexico into the U.S. So this Ed Sullivan, very important name, Ed Sullivan, she writes in her book, she killed her patient, but she thought she would go see him, you know, and take him some food. He's in prison, in jail. And she goes in there, and lo and behold, in the same cell, there's Billy the Kid and Ed Sullivan. And he recognizes Blandina. "Blandina, it's you." "Yeah," she says. So he was tied to the ground. It was terrible. "Don't worry about me. Take care of Ed. I've got a plan." And we know he, in Santa Fe escaped, right? So there's been some people that would challenge and say, "Oh, that never took place. The dates don't match, this and that." But our researcher found, this is a very important fact, found the transfer of custody from the courtroom to the jail of Billy the Kid, William Bonney, and whose name is under William Bonney? This Ed Sullivan.
Wow.
So where would she have gotten that name from? Where she would have known he was in the jail with her? So the evidence comes up. But that's not as important. But we did find something else interesting about Billy the Kid, since we're sitting here talking about New Mexico history. So we found the baptismal certificate of Billy the Kid. He was Catholic, and his parents, his mom and dad, were Irish immigrants, and they were married at St. Peter's Church in New York. Okay, and he was baptized there, and his brother was baptized there, and they were young children there, and they were probably taken care of by the nuns that were there. And who were there? The Sisters of Charity. That is one of the shrines of Elizabeth Ann Seton, the founder of the Sisters of Charity of Cincinnati. He knew what a nun was. Billy the Kid was probably the only person in Trinidad that knew what a nun was, because these were new to the West. The sisters were new. And so he was remembering the good old days before his father died and before his mother died. When he was an orphan, the family was together in New York. That's who Blandina was for him. So I have in a safe here a copy of the official copies of the baptismal record and the parents' marriage record of William Bonney. So is there a connection? Well, yeah, a little, but she's connected to us in all kinds of ways. So in the history of New Mexico, then Blandina opens up businesses that end up continuing running. She builds relationships with communities to raise funds, and then she takes on. She's an advocate. She takes on the county commission, the city council, the state, the territorial legislature. She's trying to get money to indigent fund to bury the dead at the hospital. You have to buy a box. You got to get somebody to dig a hole. You got to buy a space, a grave site, all these things. And she goes to the meeting, and the chair of the county commission says, "Sister, these are hard times. We have to economize, sister." So she leaves. So then one of the patients dies. They have a dead man, and she puts him in a wheelbarrow and takes him to the meeting. And the story says, she says it one way, and you hear different parts of it, that she threw a shovel at the county commissioner. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but we do know she went back and said, "It's your turn to economize." Here's the body. It's your turn to economize. So Blandina is practical and yet holy, and yet in many ways doing heroic work. And sometimes she's very scared. She's a defender of Native Americans' rights, of the Mexican American and the Spanish American rights, and starts orphanages, hospitals, and schools that are still running today.
And when she went, she was really young. I remember. She was
22 years old when she came, but she was terrified of cowboys. When they set her up, man. People were teasing her, and these men in Cincinnati, and on the train, through getting to Kansas, they told her there's nothing more dangerous than a cowboy. And the first cowboy climbs into a stagecoach with her, and she's terrified. So this is on her way in from Kansas to Colorado, and this guy gets in there. And if you see the movie at the end of the Santa Fe Trail by our friends that made that wonderful movie, he's a pretty good looking cowboy, climbs into the stagecoach with her, and he has a buffalo hide, and he throws it over her too, and she thinks he's gonna kill her or whatever. She's terrified. By the time that stagecoach gets to Trinidad, he's terrified of her. He gets out of that stagecoach. "Yes, sister, I will write my mother today." I will write to him today. So she, helps lost children back to their parents,
There's a movie? I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, at the end of the Santa Fe Trail. Yeah.
Who produced that? Do you know where it's available?
Yes, I will give you all that before we end, so you can.
And then I did just remember isn't there some series that they're producing on Trinidad or something where she's going to be a character?
They're working on that, and then there's another one. I'll give you all that information also.
So what is the process? So she did all these really amazing things. The word I think of is no nonsense. She's very no nonsense. It's not like which I think, and people have said this about other very holy people, that there's sort of this reverence and, you don't want to cuss in front of them. You don't want to, that they're these perfect angels or whatever, but that's not really how work gets done.
Yeah.
And how she, how someone like that could have accomplished all the things that she got done. Like, she had to be very feisty and opinionated and that advocacy piece, and she also had to be flexible. And so I think she's also very down to earth.
She's very practical. You know, the saints rise to the occasion while they're alive and while they're dead. And she would rise to those occasions. I think, there's a saying that that Blandina would say, what presents itself, serve it. But I think she went deeper than that. I think she would daily discern who are the vulnerable and what do they need from me. Every day, that was her life. That was everything that drove her. And so, like, sometimes we think of a saint, oh, this is a prayerful person in the corner over there. No, this is a person that has humility. And humility means that you're honest about what your gifts and talents are too, and your capabilities, and using them. That's true humility. Not to bury your talent. You have to use that talent. And so she fits that perfectly. So her heroic virtue, causes the cause to be opened. And we saw that. Our board of directors, after we sold the hospital and we're searching for, what's our new strategy. We have the same mission. We make the healing presence of God known in our world by improving the health of the people we serve, especially the vulnerable, while we advance social justice for all. How do we do that? How do we live that out without the present hospital? Now, the system that Sister started still exists today, and it's grown. And many congregations have brought their assets and put it into the same system. So it went from St. Joseph's Hospital to the Sister Charities system to Catholic Health Initiative system, as more joined it. Now, recently, 4 years ago, the Dignity Health. Now it's called Common Spirit, but it's still the same organization that was started. So it's grown into the largest nonprofit healthcare provider in the nation. Her, along with many other nuns. But here, our organization still exists that she started. And our board saw her at work inspiring us through her book. And so when we did the inquiry, when the Rome gives permission, we asked for it in 2013, and this was a special event because usually the inquiry takes place where the person dies and is buried. Blandina's in Cincinnati. But we went to the two archbishops, and the Archbishop of Cincinnati granted permission to the Archbishop of Santa Fe to be what they call the competent bishop, the person that would oversee it. So that was transferred to Archbishop Sheehan. And so we saw her inspiring. And when all this, like 14,000 documents were gathered and taken in, a diplomatic pouch and can't be opened until it's in the Vatican. And when our postulator, Bishop Ramirez from Las Cruces, goes with us, the promoter of justice, Father Oscar Coelho, Archbishop Sheehan, the president of the Sisters of Charity, a few other sisters from our board. So when we deliver this, and the postulator in Rome, so we're in the Vatican at that time, called the Congregation for the Causes of Saints. And there is a chancellor, and he takes the custody of the documents. But he said something really beautiful. He says, regardless if she's ever made a saint, you have offered this little one as an example to the world. That was so cool. Everybody in the room was crying at that point, And now she's in the hands of Rome to examine all of this. And last year, a very important phase took place. The 7-member historical commission approved the Positio. This is a synthesis or a gathering, 800 pages that tells her argues for her heroic virtue out of the thousands of documents that went to Rome, and you have to prove so many things. So now it's in the hands of the Theological Commission, and once they approve that, and very close, then the dicastery, the bishops and cardinals that sit on that for the cause of saints, they'll vote. And if they vote in the positive to recommend to Pope Leo, then Leo can make her venerable. If she's venerable, then we move to beatification. So venerable is everything about while they're alive. Okay, so there's 3 things you always hear. There's venerable, beatified, and then canonized. Venerable means you proved that they lived a heroic life and that they live Christian Catholic values. You proved that. Then beatification is about miracles. You need one for beatification, and it takes place after the cause is open. So the cause was petitioned in 13. It was opened in 2014. And in that time, we have 51 miracles attributed to her. So she's busy. She was a busybody when she was alive, and she's still a busybody from heaven. So I tell people, pray to her now because she's going to get really busy when she's the whole world knows her. And so then you only need one. So two are being, and we can't give information because it's health records, but when it's complete, everybody will be able to see everything and who's the person who was granted that miracle. So there's many people who attribute a miracle to her. Then what do you prove? Well, someone told me, well, can you explain a miracle to me? I said, no, because if I can explain it to you, then it's not a miracle. So what we need is if it's a healing, for doctors to say, this is non-explainable. You can't explain this. So there's two that are in full inquiry. One of those will be used for beatification. Then after the date of beatification, she has to perform another miracle, a new one. It's like if we're knocking on her grave and saying, hey, sister, are you conscious of us? Do you know what we're doing down here? And can we pray to you? And then, for non-Catholics, it's just the same way as you ask someone to pray for you. I had this friend milk cows for me when I had a dairy farm at one time, and he says, will you pray for my daughter? Yeah, I will. And if I die tonight, do you want me to keep praying? He's like, freaks out. What do you mean? Well, if I die tonight and by the grace of God I get into heaven, do you want me to keep praying? He said, yeah. Oh, then you believe in the communion of saints. That's all simple. That's how simple it is. We don't have to make it more complicated than that. It's that we pray when we're alive and we can pray when we're dead. And if we're in full communion with God, then we're more than what we are on earth. Therefore, there should be more prayer. But that's the part for faith. But the story reaches beyond just faith because there's values that are needed today. And I think the correct approach to immigrants is what Blandina exemplified for us in the second half of her life in Cincinnati. She also was made a probation officer, so she would have legal protection to raid houses of ill repute to save young girls from white. And she saves this little girl when she's in the hospital, Ward Zero. Imagine a ward called Zero, and that's where they would send these girls that were young prostitutes dying. And this one little girl that was 14 years old, very critical, but she's able to convince her to stand up to those that trafficked her. And this girl and Blandina are the first women in recorded history to testify in Congress on human trafficking. Wow. She was friends with Thomas Edison, and she opened up a school for the hearing impaired. And there's letters between them, and there's a letter with the drawing of how to make from Thomas Edison to make a hearing aid. We have photographs of her and Cecil B. DeMille. She would find the way, and I'm just wondering, I could just see little Blandina saying, you ought to do a movie on the Ten Commandments, But these are really great connections all over, surprising. And when we started the cause, there were some people saying, well, it's going to take some money. Yeah, but the return is great because people get to know her story. It costs money to tell a story. But they said, I don't know if Blandina would ever be involved in something like this. And then what do we find? The first box, when I go with the postulator to the archives, and there we find all the paperwork. Blandina was one of the petitioners of the cause of Elizabeth Ann Seton, the founder of the Sisters of Charity. Wow. And here's her documentation going to Rome, newspaper articles, her passport, her notes, where she goes, and in those days you personally meet with the Pope to petition the cause of Elizabeth Ann Seton.
So when you all started this, you knew a lot of the things that she had done. But,
we discovered so much.
But did you anticipate that there would be, because I'm just thinking, I do genealogy research and that kind of stuff, and it's hard to find all that stuff. And it's uncommon to find, primary records and like actual mentions and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Did you even realize that there would be so much that you would able to uncover?
We knew there would be records at the archives, some records of the sisters, and because she started institutions, those institutions have records, so you could find in their archives, so you would find that. But all these stories that would come up, not just from her book, but then things that would lead out of the book into other areas. I thought our role as a petitioner was going to be to get it open. That's a big enough. Usually that takes years to open a cause, and this one got opened in 8 months. And then the first inquiry was done in a year. The second one was done in the second year of the local inquiry. Then that went to Rome, Then we had the pandemic, and that put us back a little. So we're really 8 years into this, not 10, because of the pandemic. And so along the way, the amount of discovery. So you have a local inquiry that has a local historic commission, and these are archivists and investigators that are appointed to that by the archbishop that oversees it. It's like a court. It's like convening a grand jury to look at evidence. But you got to find this, and you start pulling out more and more. And now, there's all about her life, and I've been fortunate to be part of that and see that. There's as the petitioner, my role is to drive the thing, to keep it moving, keep it going forward. The bishop can't say she's a saint because Rome can only do that. But I can declare her a saint as a believer, and that's the church to acknowledge that. They declare her for the church. But she was given the title Servant to God, which means we can pray to her. And there's a novena, beautiful novena to her. You can get that online at the Sisters of Charity's website also, and you can get the book there. So the cause is very complicated. And so when we opened it, one of the things that motivated us, people talked about it for years. But what motivated us, when I found out there were 3 sisters still alive that knew her.
Oh my gosh.
So this is in 2014. So there's one of them is 98, another one is 99, and the other one's 101.
Oh my gosh.
And these were nuns that took care of her when they were novices, and she was close to the end of her life.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we had to get them on record. We had to get this thing open. We had to get this thing rolling, and they did. They got the inquiry got their statements. Then Blandina's great nieces and nephews were interviewed, and then people whose parents knew her well in Cincinnati. So there's a whole other life in Ohio and in Cincinnati that takes place there. So it's like she lived 2 complete different lives. And so then she died in 1941 at the age of 81. And on February 23rd of 1941 she died. So she basically went from the covered wagon to the jet airplane,
Yeah, whenever I see people, like I think my great-grandmother was born in 1880 and she died in 1973. Would just think about the incredible span of life
that's
that
a
she
huge
lived.
change.
So there aren't that many. So I'm from Oklahoma, so we have the Blessed Stanley Rother. It's a big deal to have American saints, or in the process.
Yeah, there's a number of people that are in the process in the United States right now, and it's incredible because first you got to get enough evidence to open a cause, then you got to get all that it takes to get veneration, and that means lots and lots of documentation. And first thing is, after you put the documentation together, you have to have they declare does it have juridic value? Did you have all the documents and things that you needed to have? And then the positio has to be written, and that takes a long time. Her positio is over 800 pages long, and it's like a pleading to a court, and it puts all this evidence of her, of her holiness, her faithfulness to the church, her obedience, and yet her work, and then on the sideline you're working on the beatification, which the Vatican won't open that inquiry of miracles until veneration takes place. Because you got to first prove that they had the heroic virtue. Once that takes place, then they can open up the Roman inquiry. The diocesan inquiries will be done, and they'll be sitting there, and I can't give you any details about that, but those will be sitting there in the Vatican waiting for her veneration so they can open it and examine it. So then, right now there's doctors being interviewed, there's witnesses, there's all these things going on, and someday we'll get to all know publicly about all that. Her work with the immigrants, she will most likely be the patron saint of universal health care. Wow. And the patron saint of immigrant children, because she was an immigrant child herself. When she arrived in New Orleans, they tried kidnapping her. Imagine the second day there, and somebody tried stealing her. It was a horrible event, horrible event. but they prevent that from happening. They beat up her dad. They were still going to steal her, pulling her away, and other Italians heard her yelling in Italian and came running to her aid. So she saw a lot of bad things as a little kid growing up with immigrants going up the river to Ohio. And of course there was lots, but they were Italian immigrants. So while Mother Cabrini was building hospitals in New York, she was building hospitals in Santa Fe with no money. Yeah.
So she was only 4 when they came over to the U.S.?
Yeah.
Okay, I think I missed that because I was picturing her, just like thinking of the language barrier when she came out here. I mean, obviously she probably didn't speak Spanish, right?
She learned Spanish.
She had to learn it when she was here? She
learned it here. I think she had studied some, but it became, she got fluent in it here. She had to. So her Italian, Spanish, and English. And then they say she could also read French. And, they're kind of similar, but that still takes some studying. It doesn't transfer so easily over. And, of course, she would have known Latin, too, because at that time, the Mass was in Latin and prayers and other things that she studied. But, she wasn't formally trained in medicine, but she served as a nurse and an administrator, of hospitals. And her teaching, her school here, San Felipe, part of that convent, the first floor was built, and she came along and built the second floor. They're going to put in a museum and a retreat center, and there's going to be a shrine. So this is one of the things that we're talking about. Well, what happens when she's venerable? Her body will be brought out of the cemetery at the mother house and put into the chapel of the church that the sisters have there. But her left rib closest to her heart will be given to St. Joseph's Children. And we have an agreement that will be lent to the Archdiocese, and the Archdiocese of Santa Fe will have that at San Felipe to be venerated. So San Felipe de Neri is pretty excited about that, because that's where the first Albuquerque school is. And if you step behind the Sister Blandina convent, there's the shop, and that's where they're making the retreat center. The schoolhouse is still standing there.
Really?
Cute little schoolhouse.
The original?
The one she built.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, there's a store in it now, but it's leased out. But the church still owns it. Their plan is to make that part of the shrine. But there's a steeple on it, a little bell tower on the center of it, and it has a plaque. So if you walk around on the west side of San Felipe de Neri Church and Convent, you'll see that little building, and there's a great big plaque that says First School in Albuquerque. And then she started St. Mary's downtown, that parish and that school. She started the St. Vincent's Girls' School that was just down the street from here, would be on Lomas and 6th Street.
When I was in Trinidad last summer, it's been a year now, so maybe there's more going on there, but I was trying to find where I can't remember who I think I went to the the diocese or the administrative building there to try to figure out where was the school that she built in Trinidad, which is not now a parking lot, unfortunately. But
the building's not there.
Are there efforts they built a garden there, and then are there any other efforts to have some kind of a welcome center or something?
Well, that'll be San Felipe, the convent. That's the Blandina convent. That will be a retreat center.
Okay.
And then they're doing some work. They're going to do work on what was the outbuildings on the east side of the building of the church and of the rectory. And that's going to be a museum for her. And then there's a beautiful monument in the park right behind St. Lovelace on Martin Luther King, which was the St. Joseph Tower, the hospital. They have a beautiful monument to the Sisters of Charity and to Blandina there. And that's really neat. And then there's another monument and shrine and statue of Blandina at St. Pius High School. They have a garden and a beautiful statue at St. Pius High School. So when you go there, you can ask to see that. That's close to the Catholic Center.
Yeah, is it hard to make those decisions about how to honor? I know there have been some conversations in Oklahoma about, because Father Rother was extremely humble. He came from a very rural upbringing in rural Oklahoma, and that he would have, several people have told me that they feel like he would have, or who knew him, that he would be sort of appalled by the big shrine that they built, but also they made an interesting decision that's really cool because it's in South Oklahoma City, which is a largely Hispanic part of Oklahoma City. So that's the congregation that's serving. They're using that as their home parish because they're busting out the seams at their parish down there. So they were now it's that the shrine is a host church for that community, which is pretty cool.
But these monuments, shrines, and places to meditate and pray, all that is important. Like Blandina, she was involved with Elizabeth Ann Seton's canonization. She was also involved with the canonization of Kateri Tekakwitha.
Wow.
We have a letter from the postulator to Blandina and the dialogue about helping out and getting that done. And it's funny, the postulator for Kateri Tekakwitha, it was Father John Wayne, so she was involved. She would believe that, there's money involved in it. Yeah, but like the earned media pays for that over and over and over again. I was just seeing like a story that recently that came out. The earned media, what is that about? Means the opportunity to tell her story because it's inspiring, regardless if you're Catholic or not. We're not just saying this so you'll want to be Catholic or believe she's a saint or pray to her. I mean, we want people to pray, but for those that aren't Catholic, it's also for everyone to look at her core values, those values that she had about the dignity of the human being. And that's worth telling over and over again. And that costs money. And so we spend money on a lot of other things that aren't as important. But to have a monument that reminds us that you can live the gospel. Someone the other day, a young man who's a convert to the church, Byzantine Catholic, he was saying, well, there's this talk about divine will. Is it even possible for that to happen? Of course it is. That was St. Francis of Assisi's whole debate when the local bishop is suppressing his movement, and he goes to Pope Innocent, and he asks him, look, just tell us, if the gospel can't be lived, then we won't live it and we'll just go home. No, it can be lived. And these people are witnesses that the gospel can be lived. Your Oklahoma priest, he knew returning to Central America was a death warrant. He knew he was going to his death. But he loved those people so much that he had to be with them. Same with Blandina. She loves us, and we were close to her heart and her example. Yeah, was she a part of a time that was very different, and was New Mexico being colonized by the United States? Yes. But that wasn't her doing. She was part of the people coming. I can't deny that. But she came and was able to find dignity from the most guilty to the most innocent. From the most guilty to the most innocent. And that's a story worth telling. And if it costs money to put up a statue to say that, that's fine. Someone said, well, St. Joe's, you spent some money on this cause, and we run. Well, we have a pretty big budget of home visiting. We do free home visiting. We're the largest home visiting program in the nation, going into homes of first-time parents once a week for 3 years with a curriculum, health, well-being, and school readiness. And that budget is in the millions of dollars. But there's a small amount that's spent on doing this promotion of Blandina, because that will create the goodwill that will reach even more people who are needy.
Because I was thinking earlier, as we were talking about her age and how she somehow knew how to do all these things and was able to start these businesses and fundraise and minister to the sick when she had no formal training in that or whatever. Thinking about me as a 22-year-old, I was wondering if that's part of the cause or the evidence, is that she was somehow able to do all of those things despite not having that experience or training or whatever. But even if not, that's such a inspiring story itself, that it's about the nature of heroicism is that maybe you don't know how to do something, or you've never done it before, or you're scared, but that you see a need and you step in
and you serve it. So so it's not that saints are this special gifted person. Mm-hmm. No, they're normal, average people who do extraordinary things because of their courage. And on my understanding, the last 10 years of studying her and exploring, and I mean, she's become my good friend. And I first heard of her when I was in second grade at St. Mary's School by Sister Virginia Lavato, who was a Sister of Charity in Cincinnati. The Sister Charities ran that school. But I don't know if she was actually the one that had the courage. She was able to help people find their courage. That 14-year-old girl, she helped her find her courage. The shooter who had to ask for forgiveness, find the courage. The dying man to forgive his shooter and come out of that bitterness, find his courage. She helped people find their courage. And there's the charism. Who doesn't need that encouragement today in our world today? Find your courage. It's not, the game isn't over till it's over, you know. Our life, every day, got to get up and find that courage. And she talks about, you reading the book, she's shaking in her boots, she says, you know. She's terrified. But she knows God put her there. She had confidence in God, and she had confidence in other human beings, which we're really losing fast. And she brings that back, that, you know, no, the town will come together. She gets on the roof to put a new roof on a school or build a new school. Man, it's a kind of little old Catholic guilt, but she's guilting them into it. Like, get the courage. Then before you know it, they're bringing tools, they're bringing materials, they're bringing labor, and they'll build something. There was always need. And like the Sisters of Charity, they came to New Mexico not to compete, but to do what nobody wants to do. And that's why they sold the hospital. We didn't need to compete with Loveless and Presbyterian and UNM. And it was by the grace of God that actually happened. At first we thought it was a giant tragedy. But no, those assets didn't leave the community. It was just a change of strategy. Same mission, different strategy. And now, you know, we're keeping children from having to be in the hospital. So that's Blandina's way. And that's how I felt every time going to advocate in the legislature for the constitutional amendment for early childhood. Blandina did this. We can do this.
What is needed now at this point? Is there any kind of support that's needed
for the
at
cause?
this stage?
No, for the cause, all that work that's done. What's needed is to tell the story so that people can be inspired by it. That's what we're doing, and we ask people. And I'm glad you're doing this podcast because it's spreading her story.
Working on me today.
Yeah, so it's a historical story, and it's also a faith story. You know. The Searchlight New Mexico, which is a New Mexico investigative journalism magazine, and they cover a lot. They cover a lot of dark stuff. You know, CYFD, children dying, the Albuquerque police, DWI scandals. You know, corruption in Santa Fe government. But they did a big story on Blandina. Now I don't know if they were looking for hoax or what, because they went down this road and they didn't find it. And so then they published this a couple of weeks ago. And you can look that up on Searchlight New Mexico. And they went in depth. And boy, for 7 months, they grilled me about everything. They came out at the end saying, "There's," and the author in the writing admits that is an atheist and says there is great value for New Mexico with the canonization of Sister Blandina. You know, because there is a behavior to imitate there, her values. Regardless if you think she's a saint or not, we need more people to live like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the one you sent me was a Searchlight.
Yeah.
And the Smithsonian one you were talking about is a separate one.
Yeah, the Smithsonian magazine. If you just
I'll have to
Google,
look that one up.
You Google Sister Blandina Smithsonian magazine. Comes up real easy.
Well, I'll put that one.
And that has about the research and Peso Chavez, who was the investigator in Santa Fe who took on the thing. Criminal investigator, you know, worked on death row issues and other kinds of big profile cases, and then he took it on. He was appointed by the Archbishop to the commission, and he said, "Okay, how am I going to go back all these years and find this stuff?" And he found it. Yeah, can we tell everything about Billy the Kid? I don't know, and you know, that's not the cause. We're not canonizing Billy the Kid or her relationship with Billy. And in a way, the canonization process also beatifies and canonizes the whole congregation of the nuns, because she didn't do this in a vacuum. I mean, there's all these sisters with her doing this important work. But for whatever reason, the ones that the church promote, the people come forward to promote as saints, is that it's a mystery. We don't know why some people may have the ability to be conscious of us on the other side after they die. Blandina's showing that in in intercession. An intercession.
How many worldwide are in the process at the Vatican?
Of canonizations? Oh, probably in the hundreds.
Oh,
Maybe in the
really?
hundreds.
Wow. Okay.
It'll be a lot. It'll be a lot. Not all of them get there. So our postulator, when we started out, he said 5% of the causes will be opened.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then of that group, 5% of them will get venerated. And then of that group, maybe 10% are going to get to beatified. And then maybe 1% is going to get to sainthood.
Wow.
But that means there's a lot of holy people that people, believe in. And it surprises you. Italy has the most canonized saints. The second largest is Vietnam. You think Vietnam? Wow. Why would it be that? Well, a lot of suffering took place there. So, and then after that is France. So, then the New World, in the sense of to Catholicism, 2,000 years old, but yet Catholicism only 400 or 500 years in the Americas. We're just catching up. And poor Juan Diego, it took 500 years to make him a saint. But the problem there was when the intercessions, they didn't know, was it Our Lady Guadalupe or was it him interceding? Well, that's a very difficult thing to tell. So with her causes, they have to also prove, was it a prayer to Blandina? And there are some of these reported to be instantaneous miracles.
Wow.
Then you know who they prayed to.
Well, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you
story
for taking the time and welcoming us.
Have you been able to kind of share her story pretty far and wide at this point?
Yeah, when the cause was opened, the Associated Press told us that it was the most repeated story printed in the world.
Cool.
Yeah, the day after.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
wow.
so that was kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, I mean, she's really awesome. That's why I really wanted to do this, because
and you think we don't. There's more that we need to think about women in the history of New Mexico. A lot of the men make the headlines, but I think behind every good idea, Lemihad was Blandina. There's a letter there where she's writing to Blandina. Catherine Drexel, another saint who started St. Catherine's School in Santa Fe. There's a contemporary of Blandina. There's a letter, and she's telling the Archbishop, look, just sign the decree giving her permission to open the school. She's recruiting her. So Blandina's the one recruiting Catherine Drexel to open a school in Santa Fe. But the letter is funny because it ends with, she brings her own money. Always thinking the practical. Okay, we gotta make it happen, Archbishop.
Yep. Well, good luck in this effort, and really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Luminaria. You can reach me at luminariapod@gmail.com. Our intro and outro music is of Varsoviana, performed by Nieves Anaya and his daughter Ernestina Anaya at Arroyo Hondo, New Mexico in 1940. It's part of the Juan Bautista Rael collection at the Library of Congress.